Kahlil Matthews stood frozen in the lecture hall. His solution erased, his name crossed out. The white professor looked him dead in the eye and said, "This kind of brilliance doesn't come from people like you." Students laughed. Phones recorded, but what none of them knew was that Kahlil had already solved the unsolvable. And tonight, the world would watch him do it again. Live. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The lecture hall felt colder than usual, though the windows were shut and the sunlight filtered through slats, casting long, thin stripes across the rows of seats. It was semester's midpoint at Winterfield University, and the room held more than 50 students in pale dress shirts and hoodies. Expectant faces turned toward the center, toward Dr. Emmett Caldwell. He stood in front of a massive whiteboard, chalk in hand, his tie slightly loose, his posture rigid. The air carried the sharp smell of dry erase markers, chalk dust, and nerve. Kahlil Matthews sat 2 rows from the front, exactly beneath the large analog clock, which ticked like a metronome counting down to something he could already feel tightening in his chest. He had his notebook open, lines filled, margins annotated, his pencil poised. His skin, dark against the light, seemed to absorb the tension around him. He had come from a childhood where being seen was risky. In this hall, being invisible felt safer. Yet here he was, visible, expected, and under judgment. Dr. Caldwell swept his eyes across the room, pausing on Kahlil, as if calculating something. The professor's voice, crisp and measured, carried across the hall. "Today we will tackle something advanced, a proof combining implicit functions, multivariable integrals, and the Jacobian transform. I want someone who hasn't just memorized formulas, but understands deeply. Let's begin." He paused, looking straight at Kahlil. The students near the center shifted slightly. Some recognized the weight in Caldwell's tone. Others barely noticed, absorbed in their screens, or textbooks, scrolling or underlining, draining time. Kahlil's palms were flat on the desk. He clasped them together briefly, breathing through the moment. In his mind, a silent declaration. "I know this. I can do this." Dr. Caldwell turned, chalk scratching on board, and wrote the problem. It was long, intentionally winding. Find all functions, f, x, y, f, x, y, satisfying a condition, evaluate for boundary constraints, compute limit surfaces, show certain divergence, then conclude something unexpected about symmetry. The class murmured. A few notebooks snapped shut. Some looked up, eyebrows raised. The statement was known among graduate students to be taxing. Many would stall, stumble, or avoid it entirely. Then Caldwell's voice cut through. "Now, it occurs to me that some of you might find this beyond reach, years beyond reach. In fact," he said with eyes still on Kahlil, "it's sometimes said that students from underprivileged backgrounds, or non-industry preparatory high schools, struggle with these proofs. The idea that someone like you, Kahlil, could derive this on the board, unaided, unaffiliated with extra tutoring, it's ambitious." He paused. The room was still. Kahlil's heart hammered, each beat echoing. Others exchanged awkward glances. Had Caldwell just mocked Kahlil's background? Yes, it was public. Yes, it was calculating. There was a stiff silence. Then Caldwell added, "However, I will give someone a chance. Step forward. Solve this fully, in front of us, without reference, without notes, or admit you cannot." The undercurrent in his voice was unmistakable. Disbelief, condescension, expectation. Kahlil's pencil dropped. He stared at the board, lines of chalk bleeding into each other under Caldwell's confident hand. He swallowed, his throat dry. He could feel the gaze of every student, every notebook, every eye that flicked toward him. For the first time, some students noticed how small his frame was, how clean-cut, how precise his posture. They saw that he wasn't cracking under pressure. He was calculating it all, piece by piece. Kahlil rose. The chair scraped, heads turned. Some leaned forward, others leaned back, scanning their phones. Caldwell nodded. A small gesture, almost imperceptible, one of those that says, "Yes, this is who I meant." Kahlil walked to the board. He stood beneath the problem, the chalk tray low, the lights harsh overhead. He took a breath. Then he wrote the first line, defining the implicit function condition. His hand steadied. Every student watched, some curious, some skeptical. Caldwell crossed his arms, The tension stretched. Was this humiliation, or moment of definition? Was Kahlil about to fail spectacularly? Kahlil drew the second line, the partial derivatives, the transformation, the integrals, his handwriting neat. He paused only to glance at Caldwell. The professor's expression was unreadable, a mask that didn't betray whether he expected disaster. Around the room, some students shifted, whispering, others fixed their eyes, silent witnesses to what might become a spectacle. As Kahlil moved through the steps, something shifted. The air seemed to tighten, each student's full attention compressed on him. The murmur died. The scratching of pens paused. Even Caldwell leaned in, head tilted slightly, as if hearing a new note in an old familiar piece of music. Kahlil's chalk traced the path of an argument that many had declared unreachable. Yet here it was, unfolding in real time. Partial derivatives, limit conditions, Jacobian factors. At one moment, Kahlil's mind stumbled, caught in the divergence condition. His hand paused. In that pause, the humiliation seemed certain. The stumble inevitable. Twice his breath hitched. The class exchanged looks. Some waited for him to collapse. Some prepared to see the professor shake his head. Then, unexpectedly, he erased the segment he had just written. His hand moved with decisive confidence, not panic. He rewrote. The equation took a different route. A simpler path, yet one that no one in that room had anticipated. A trick he'd discovered in his independent study. A theorem buried in 19th-century mathematical footnotes, rarely taught in standard modules. The line he erased was unnecessary baggage, dragging him in circles. The new path was elegant. The room exhaled but silently. Caldwell's lips parted, as if to interject, but no words came. Time seemed to slow. Chalk dust drifted in the light. Caldwell's chest tightened, not with fear anymore, but with focus. His eyes scanned the board, his mind mapping the next step. Then, in a voice that cracked the tension, Caldwell spoke. Impressive, but can you finish it without error, without hesitation, without aid? The taunt was soft, poised, a challenge wrapped in condescension. Without answering, Kahlil turned back to the board. His hand trembled only for a moment. He resumed, computing the boundary constraints, handling the limit, verifying the symmetry condition. Students saw his mind working, saw the proof blooming. As he approached the final step, his expression changed. Calm, resolute. The last piece, the hardest leap, awaited. All eyes followed him. Some students shifted, leaning over notebooks, trying to follow. Some closed their eyes, waiting. Caldwell raised his brow. No one spoke. Then Kahlil paused at the final line before writing the conclusion. He looked out at the room, measured every face. He inhaled slowly. The chalk in his hand seemed heavier now. Then, and only then, he lifted it toward the board and began writing the concluding formula. One no one expected. But the answer he writes sends a murmur through the hall. One that changes everything. The chalk barely touched the board before the silence was broken. Not by gasps or cheers, but by a slow rising murmur. Whispers darted across the lecture hall like sparks trying to catch fire. Kahlil's final solution wasn't just correct. It introduced a method that many of them hadn't seen before. An optimization that challenged the standard path even their professor had taught. But Kahlil didn't bask in the reaction. He simply set the chalk down, turned toward the room, and scanned the faces, many still stunned, others visibly uncomfortable, like they'd just witnessed something they couldn't explain. Caldwell's mouth had tightened into a line, so fine it could have cut glass. He didn't say a word. Not yet. Kahlil didn't need him to. He felt it in his bones, the resistance, the disbelief, the reluctant respect, trying to push through decades of quiet bias. He walked back to his seat, notebook still open, eyes lowered. The whispers didn't stop. But long before this moment, before chalk proofs and unwelcome stares, Kahlil Matthews had been training for this fight. Quietly, silently, alone. He had been 8 when he first solved a calculus limit problem by accident. His older cousin had been doing homework on the kitchen table, and Kahlil, out of boredom, copied the question onto a crumpled napkin. When his cousin looked at the answer, he laughed, until he realized it was right. The adults didn't believe it at first. How could a kid from South Ashland, a neighborhood better known for flashing police lights and shuttered schools, possibly understand calculus? But Kahlil's mother knew. Vanessa Matthews, A nurse who worked double shifts and still managed to attend every PTA meeting, had seen her son stare at the microwave's digital clock for hours, counting backward in primes, trying to understand why time felt faster some days than others. Kahlil didn't talk much, but numbers, they were his language, and they spoke back. By 13, he'd completed every online course MIT had made public. At 14, he entered a statewide competition, and won. But his name was never listed in the headlines, only buried at the bottom of a newsletter. The photo they used wasn't even his. Winterfield University had offered him a scholarship after an admissions officer stumbled upon a YouTube clip of him explaining complex number theory in his bedroom, filmed by his little sister with a cracked phone. He was 6. By the time he set foot on the campus, he had already outpaced the freshman curriculum. But the walls of Winterfield weren't designed for boys like him. The first time he walked into the common room of Delacroix Hall, 3 white students stopped their conversation mid-sentence. One of them turned to him and asked if he was looking for the custodial office. Another time, a TA asked him to resubmit a problem set with a signed affidavit, because the work was suspiciously perfect. He kept quiet, not because he didn't have the words, but because he knew words would make it worse. He had watched his uncle get arrested for talking back. He'd seen his middle school teacher flinch when he raised his voice to answer a math question too quickly. So Kahlil learned how to fold his genius small enough to fit in his pocket. He listened, watched, solved quietly, and never bragged. Every day he walked through the university halls with headphones in, but no music playing, just to avoid small talk. Every seminar he sat near the front, but never in the center. Every question he knew the answer to. He answered in his head before anyone else raised their hand, until Dr. Caldwell cornered him. That night, after the lecture hall had emptied, Kahlil walked back across campus with the wind biting against his jacket. His mind replayed the board, the proof, the shifting faces. He wasn't angry. He wasn't proud. He was something else entirely. Exhausted. He passed the statue near the library, the one of Edmund Winterfield, the university's founder, a man known to have funded segregated schools under the guise of charity. They'd scrubbed his Wikipedia page recently, but Kahlil had read the archived version. As he reached Delacroix Hall, the old brick dorm building that smelled like linoleum and privilege, he noticed the hall was unusually quiet. The usual click of ping-pong balls from the common room was missing. The lights were dimmed. He reached his floor and turned the corner toward his door. Something white slid across the floor. At first he thought it was trash, a flyer maybe, but it had weight folded clean, with deliberate creases. He picked it up. The envelope was blank. No name, no seal, just crisp paper. He unlocked his door, turned on the desk lamp, and unfolded it. One line, sharp, in thin black ink. Stay in your place. He didn't move for several seconds. His eyes scanned it again, this time slower. He flipped it over. Nothing else. No signature, no logo, no handwriting to analyze. But the message didn't need a name. It screamed with the voice of 1,000 histories. Stay in your place. The words were cold, heavy, not loud, but surgical. It wasn't just a threat, it was a reminder of the invisible ceiling no one acknowledged but everyone enforced. A reminder that no matter how perfect the equation, how elegant the proof, his presence was still viewed as disruption. He placed the paper on his desk, sat down, and stared. He thought about his mother, still in her scrubs, standing in the kitchen, and saying, "Baby, being excellent won't always protect you, but it will give them fewer excuses." He thought about Mr. Travers, his old high school math teacher, the one white man who truly believed in him, who once said, "They're not scared of your mistakes, they're scared of your mind." Kahlil didn't cry. He didn't yell. He didn't even call the RA. He just reached into his drawer, pulled out his notebook, and wrote a new equation, one even more complex than the one Caldwell gave him. Not for the class, for himself. He wouldn't stay in his place. The next morning, when Kahlil arrives at class, his name is missing from the attendance roster, and a new student has taken his assigned seat. It wasn't supposed to get out, at least not like that. By dawn, the video had over 30,000 views. By lunchtime, it had crossed 100,000. But for the first 3 hours after it hit the web, Kahlil didn't even know it existed. He woke up late, still unsettled from the anonymous threat that had slipped under his dorm door just hours earlier. The note was still on his desk, a jagged reminder of the invisible rules Winterfield expected him to follow. He'd barely slept, mind spinning through numbers and memories. faces and fears. He wasn't afraid of whoever left the note. He was afraid of what it confirmed, that no matter how much he excelled, someone would always see him as a problem. Kahlil shuffled into his jeans, zipped up a hoodie, and grabbed his bag. He hadn't eaten. His stomach twisted too tightly for food. By the time he crossed the quad, heads were already turning. Not just the usual side glances, but full turns, double takes. Some whispered. Some stared with a strange new look in their eyes. Not curiosity, but recognition. Kahlil kept his pace steady, even as a few students stepped aside to let him pass, as if he were radioactive. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. When he stepped into the math department's lobby, he saw a few students huddled around a phone. He caught the words, "went viral," and Caldwell. His pulse quickened. He didn't have to ask. He already knew. His phone buzzed. A text from Julian, the only black RA on campus, and someone Kahlil barely knew. "Bro, you need to see this. It's everywhere." Attached was a link. Kahlil hesitated. Then he tapped. The screen opened to a video titled, "Professor says black student too underprepared for Ivy-level calculus. Watch what happens next." It had a thumbnail freeze frame of Kahlil standing at the whiteboard, chalk in hand, back straight, gaze calm. He tapped play. The video started with shaky camera footage from the back of the lecture hall. The angle was slightly tilted, clearly hidden, but the audio was sharp. Caldwell's voice rang out. "Some of you might find this beyond reach, years beyond reach. In fact, it's sometimes said that students from underprivileged backgrounds, or non-industry preparatory high schools, struggle with these proofs. The idea that someone like you, Kahlil, could derive this unaided, it's ambitious." Gasps in the background. A stunned silence. Then Kahlil stood up. The camera zoomed slightly. He walked to the board. The rest played out like a movie. A quiet boy calmly dismantling decades of assumption. The silence of the room. The erased line. The alternate proof. The final solution. It ended on Caldwell's frozen face. Part disbelief. Part something uglier. The comments were already piling up. "That professor needs to be fired today. How did this happen? Kahlil is a genius. Protect him at all costs. This man's calm is legendary." I would have flipped the desk. "Did y'all hear the way Caldwell said someone like you?" Disgusting. Kahlil stared at the screen, the pressure in his chest building. He wanted to feel vindicated. But he didn't. He felt exposed. By noon, the clip had crossed 300,000 views. By 3 p.m., major education Twitter accounts were sharing it. It was posted on Reddit, under "our public freakout" and "our black excellence," simultaneously. News outlets were sniffing around. University under fire, after professors' racist assumptions go viral. Students were talking in hushed voices around campus. Flyers had started appearing near the student union. "We stand with Kahlil." But the university? Nothing. No official statement. No press release. No email to the student body. Silence. Calculated. Cold silence. That was the loudest part. Kahlil sat in the back corner of the library, hoodie drawn up, laptop open. He wasn't on social media, but people kept sending screenshots, tweets with his face, think pieces with his name. Everyone had an opinion now. Some praised him as a hero. Some accused him of seeking attention. A few of the worst comments. Kahlil had stopped reading after one read. "Bet he still got in on a diversity scholarship. Let's not act like he's Einstein." He closed the screen. He didn't want to be a symbol. He didn't want to be anyone's hero. He just wanted to do math. But now he couldn't walk 5 feet without someone whispering. Couldn't breathe without feeling the weight of it all. That night, Vanessa Matthews called. He didn't want to answer, but he did. "Hey ma.
You alright?"
"I'm fine," he lied. "They talking about you on the radio." Some professor embarrassed himself. Kahlil exhaled. You mad?"
"I don't know."
There was a pause. "You know how this goes, baby. You just stay calm. Stay smart. I always do." "Yeah, and that's why they scared." The next morning, he received an email. No subject line. Just one sentence. "Dr. Caldwell would like to speak with you privately." His office. 5 p.m. No explanation. No apology. No invitation from the dean. Just a meeting request. Kahlil stared at the screen. It was so formal. It was threatening. Why now? The school still hadn't released a statement. His inbox was flooded with interview requests, podcast invites, even a DM from someone claiming to be a Netflix producer. It was unreal. Yet Winterfield remained silent. And now Caldwell wanted a meeting? Something wasn't right. At 40:55 p.m., Kahlil stood outside the math department office. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. His palms were sweating. He didn't know what Caldwell would say. Part of him expected the professor to double down, accuse him of staging the video, insist he'd been misrepresented, maybe even pressure him to deny racism had anything to do with it. The office door opened without warning. "Come in," Caldwell's voice said. Kahlil stepped inside. The blinds were closed. The air smelled like stale coffee. Books lined the walls, all math texts. A degree from Princeton sat framed behind the desk. Caldwell sat with hands folded, eyes unreadable. "Have a seat." Kahlil sat. There was silence. Caldwell's gaze didn't blink. "Do you know who recorded it?" he asked. Kahlil blinked. "No." More silence. The professor leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to contain damage." Kahlil didn't respond. Caldwell continued, voice calm but hard. "I've taught here for 27 years. I've seen gifted students come and go. What happened in that class was unfortunate, but I have no intention of letting it ruin my legacy." Kahlil looked straight at him. "So you want me to say it wasn't racist?" Caldwell's jaw tightened. "I want you to understand that perception can be shaped. That narrative can be managed. We can issue a joint statement. Say it was a misunderstanding. Praise your performance. Clear the air." Kahlil's fingers curled into his hoodie sleeve. "What if I say no?" The room chilled. Caldwell stood and walked to the window. "Then, things may become more difficult for you. The media attention, the academic scrutiny. People will start asking how a 17-year-old from the South Side got into Winterfield, who wrote your recommendations, whether you received special consideration." There it was. The threat. Polite, professional, poison. Kahlil stood, and without a word, he turned and left the office. His hands were shaking. The moment he stepped out, his phone buzzed with a notification. "New comment on video, your scholarship is next, boy." The storm hadn't passed. It had merely shifted. After the private meeting, Kahlil had expected fallout. He expected the university to finally issue a statement, to do damage control, to at least pretend to care. But instead there was silence from the administration. As if the clip hadn't gone viral. As if the comments weren't still piling in. As if Kahlil's name hadn't become a symbol of the university's deepest cracks. But the silence from Caldwell's office didn't last. 3 days after their meeting, Kahlil received another email. This time from the dean's secretary. "Dr. Caldwell has proposed a public academic demonstration between himself and Mr. Matthews to re-establish academic trust and resolve misunderstandings in front of faculty and students. Attendance optional. Event will be recorded. Mr. Matthews must confirm participation by Friday." A demonstration. A showcase. A controlled fire to burn away the truth. The school wasn't punishing Caldwell. They were giving him a stage. When Kahlil arrived at the dean's office later that afternoon to demand answers, Caldwell was already there, seated with legs crossed, the same unreadable expression on his face. The dean, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for staying out of conflict, motioned for him to sit. Caldwell leaned forward, folding his hands. "We live in a world of narratives, Mr. Matthews. Yours is powerful, emotional, compelling. But you must understand mine is one of decades, of scholarship, of tradition. I do not intend to be buried under a misunderstanding, however viral." Kahlil didn't speak. Caldwell went on. "Here is my proposal. One challenge, one problem. You solve it in front of a live audience. No tools, no notes, no help. If you succeed, I will issue a public apology. Not just to you, but to the entire student body. I will acknowledge my bias. Admit I underestimated you." Kahlil blinked. "And if I don't succeed, then the school moves on. No statement, no further damage to the institution's reputation. No media escalation. You and I both walk away. Clean." The dean interjected then. "We see this as an opportunity to bring closure, to shift the conversation from conflict to capability." It wasn't closure. It was entrapment dressed in diplomacy. But it was also a chance. That night, Kahlil sat on the rooftop of his dorm, staring at the lights across campus. His phone had been buzzing all day. Journalists, classmates, old high school teachers suddenly remembering his name. He ignored them all. Instead, he thought about the last time someone gave him a deal. He was 10. His science teacher had accused him of cheating on a test because he'd scored higher than every other student. She gave him two options: retake the test under her supervision, or accept a 0. He chose to retake it. She gave him a harder version. He aced that one too. She never apologized. Now history was repeating. Caldwell didn't want redemption. He wanted the appearance of fairness. Kahlil paced the rooftop. The offer was toxic. Perform for them again. Solve, not for the love of the problem, but to prove he belonged. One mistake, and it would validate everything they believed about him. A trap with velvet lining. Still, if he won, really won, he wouldn't just beat a problem. He'd beat the system built to cage his potential. He pulled out his notebook, flipped to a blank page, and wrote a single word: conditions. The next morning, Kahlil returned to the dean's office. No hesitation. He walked in like someone who had already won. Caldwell was waiting. "I'll do it," Kahlil said, voice steady. Caldwell nodded slightly. "Excellent. But I have a condition of my own." The room quieted. "I don't want a pre-written problem," Kahlil said. "I want it pulled live from a sealed archive, randomly selected in front of everyone. No one, not me, not you, not the audience, gets to see it until I step up to the board." Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "You want a blind challenge? I want it honest." The dean interjected, cautious. "We would need to approve." "No edits," Kahlil said. "No revisions, no filtering." Caldwell leaned back, expression unreadable. "You do realize how dangerous that is for you?" Kahlil's voice was quiet. "Only if you think I can't handle it." A long silence. Caldwell looked at him as if trying to decide if he'd underestimated the boy again, or just stumbled into something far more dangerous. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Agreed." They shook hands. The dean made notes. The demonstration was scheduled for the following Friday, at 6 p.m., in the main auditorium, open to all students and faculty, filmed, archived. The headline had already written itself, but as Kahlil turned to leave, he paused in the doorway. "One more thing," he said, not turning back. Caldwell looked up. "If I solve it, I don't just want an apology." Caldwell waited. "I want your seat." The room froze. "You step down from teaching advanced calculus. Make room for someone else. Someone who doesn't carry what you carry. That's the real apology." Caldwell's face hardened, but he didn't speak. Kahlil turned and walked out. As he exited, a secretary picked up a call and whispered into the phone. He agreed, but he just made it personal. The day before the demonstration, Kahlil couldn't focus. He sat alone in his dorm room, surrounded by silence. The blinds were drawn. The air felt heavy, almost humid, like it was holding its breath. His calculus textbooks lay unopened on the floor. His notebook sat in his lap, but the pages were blank. For once, numbers didn't bring comfort. His mind was somewhere else entirely, somewhere far removed from chalkboards and equations, somewhere darker, somewhere where silence wasn't a strategy, but a necessity for survival. Because the closer the spotlight got, the more his past refused to stay buried. Kahlil was 8 the first time a teacher called him disruptive.
He'd asked too many questions. Not loudly, not rudely, just questions. Why does multiplication work like that? Why does subtracting a negative flip the sign? Could you divide by 0 if you used imaginary numbers?
Miss Dunlap, his third-grade teacher, didn't appreciate the interruptions. "Focus on what's on the board, Kahlil," she said, "not on what isn't." He tried, but his mind couldn't help it. It raced faster than the class, faster than the teacher. So he sat on his hands and bit his tongue and learned to wait until recess to solve problems in the dirt with a stick. But even when he was quiet, he was still a problem. Too intense, too distracted, too curious. By the time he was 10, he'd been sent to the counselor's office more than a dozen times. Not for fighting, not for skipping class, but for being difficult to manage. And then came the day he would never forget. It was a Friday afternoon. His father, Marcus Matthews, had promised to pick him up from school. Kahlil had waited by the front steps, backpack slung low, a math book clutched in his hands. He remembered the page 2113, about geometric sequences. He was halfway through solving one, when the sirens pulled up. 2 squad cars, lights on, doors open. He didn't see his dad at first. Just the officers, rushing towards someone behind the gate. The shouting started before the confusion cleared. Marcus had been standing beside his car. No weapons. No threat. He hadn't even stepped onto school property. But someone had called the police. Said there was a suspicious black man waiting near the schoolyard. Within minutes, Marcus was on the ground, cuffed, while kids gathered at the fence to watch. Kahlil stood frozen, book in hand, eyes wide, breathing shallow. One of his classmates pointed and laughed. Another whispered, "Is that your dad?" The shame burned deep, not because of his father, but because he couldn't do anything. Because no one did anything. Not the teachers, not the principal, not the parents. They all just watched. The school called it a misunderstanding. His father was released later that day, without charges. But the image was seared into Kahlil's brain. Black hands behind his father's head, his cheek pressed to concrete. The echo of a voice screaming, "Don't move." After that, Kahlil learned what it meant to be silent. To shrink. To become invisible, in plain sight. Back in the present, Kahlil sat up, wiped his eyes, and grabbed his phone. He scrolled past the messages, the tags, the article links. He opened his photos. One image stared back at him, a picture of a chalkboard filled with equations. From a tutoring session his father had set up for him when he was 12. Marcus wasn't a mathematician, but he believed in Kahlil. He had worked nights, cleaned buildings, fixed cars, just to afford extra textbooks, a used TI-89, and a whiteboard they mounted in their apartment's tiny hallway. That hallway became Kahlil's sanctuary. When the world outside got too loud, too cruel, he'd write numbers until the pain blurred. He closed the photo and called his mother. Vanessa picked up on the second ring. "Hey, baby." Her voice was warm, tired but familiar, the kind of voice that could pull him back from the edge. "Ma," he said, trying to keep steady. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think I'm doing the right thing? This challenge, this whole mess. I didn't ask for it." There was a pause. "You didn't ask for the fire, baby. But you learned how to walk through it." Kahlil swallowed. "Do you remember that day when they arrested Dad outside the school?" Another pause. A breath. Every minute of it. "Why didn't we fight it? Why didn't we do something?" Her voice softened. "Because we were afraid. And because we were tired. Sometimes, baby, surviving feels like the only thing you can afford." Kahlil leaned against the wall. "I still see it." "So do I." More silence. Then Vanessa said, "Kahlil, there's something I should have told you. Something I didn't think you were ready for before." He froze. "What?" Another breath. "You remember when you got accepted to Winterfield? How proud we were." "Yeah. Well, that scholarship you got, the Merit Plus award. What about it? It wasn't just your scores. Someone helped push your file through." He blinked. "Who?" Vanessa hesitated. "Your father?" Kahlil's voice dropped. "What do you mean? He never told you, but he used to clean offices downtown. One of them belonged to an alum, a trustee. They started talking. Your dad showed him your notebooks, your scores, begged him to look past the zip code, past your age. That man pulled your file out of a pile and put it in front of the admissions board." Kahlil felt his chest tighten. "So I didn't earn it." "No," Vanessa said firmly. "You earned every damn bit of it. But sometimes the door is locked, and someone has to knock loud enough for them to open it." Kahlil sat in silence. His father had never told him. He died the year before Kahlil enrolled, never seeing him step onto campus. He thought about all the times he felt like he didn't belong. All the doubts, the whispers, the notes slid under his door. He wasn't just walking into that demonstration for himself. He was walking in with the weight of every invisible hand that pushed him forward. That night, as Kahlil prepares for bed, he receives a package at his door. Inside is a sealed envelope, with the university's crest, and a note. "You're being watched." The auditorium was full before the hour even struck. Rows of seats, usually half empty during guest lectures, were now a tightly packed sea of bodies. Students, faculty, and even a few reporters who had managed to get campus clearance. The hum of whispers, the rustle of notepads, the quiet flashes of camera phones, all formed an electric undercurrent of anticipation. They weren't here for a lesson. They were here for a spectacle. At the front of the room stood a massive whiteboard, wider than usual, stretched end to end. Beside it, a digital countdown timer had been installed, counting back from 60 minutes. On a table nearby lay a single piece of chalk, unbroken, unnaturally pristine. The problem had not yet been revealed. According to the terms, It would be pulled from the university's archive of historic, unsolved, or rarely attempted doctoral-level problems. Randomized, authenticated, untouched, neither Kahlil nor Dr. Caldwell had access to it in advance. But no one doubted who had chosen the archive, and no one doubted what the real goal was. Backstage, behind a curtain partition, Kahlil stood alone. He wore a simple black hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. Nothing performative, no press team, no friends in the wings, just him and the weight. He could hear the muffled voices from the other side of the curtain. He imagined their faces, the classmates who had smirked at him, the professors who had ignored him, the administrators who had gone silent. He rolled his shoulders back. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the pressure. He wasn't just solving a math problem today, he was solving their expectations, their prejudice, their certainty that someone like him couldn't do this without luck, without help, without slipping. From the crowd's side, the dean walked on stage to polite applause. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "Today's challenge is part of an academic dialogue designed to demonstrate the power of logic, resilience, and the spirit of our university. The problem will be drawn at random, authenticated by a third party, and solved if possible within 1 hour." She gestured to a secure folder held by a neutral faculty representative. The folder was opened. Inside, 3 envelopes, sealed. One was drawn at random and handed to the dean. She opened it, pulled out a printed sheet, and stepped aside. Dr. Caldwell emerged from stage left, crisp suit, smug expression, and Kahlil stepped out from stage right. No suit, no smile, just presence. The crowd buzzed, then silence. The dean clipped the paper to the top of the board, and there it was. The equation was not just hard, it was cruel. It sprawled across the top of the board like a dare. It mixed tautology, multi-dimensional boundary theory, and Fourier transforms. It required not just brute calculation but insight, a combination of intuition, memory, and raw cognitive muscle, designed to overwhelm, designed to distract, designed to make him fold. Kahlil walked up to it. His feet felt like they were sinking into the floor. His breath caught in his throat. The chalk waited. The timer began. 50. He reached for the chalk, and his hand shook slightly. A murmur ran through the crowd. A few students began to record. And then he began. At first he didn't write. He paced. He stared at the board, brow furrowed, absorbing each symbol, translating the complexity in his head. The timer ticked past 58 minutes. Then he drew the first line, not on the board, but mentally, marking where to begin dismantling the problem. The first movement was a simplification of variables, a guess at symmetry. He didn't start at the beginning of the equation. He started in the middle, right where the bait was buried. He circled it with chalk, marking the trap. The crowd stilled. He began dissecting the problem outward, piece by piece, taking apart the assumptions built into it. Dr. Caldwell stood by, arms crossed. The dean watched, occasionally glancing at her watch. By the 45-minute mark, Kahlil had completed a full logical path through the inner segment of the problem. He stopped. He erased a section. A gasp from the audience. Then he rewrote it differently, reversing the direction of the integral, folding the multidimensional variable back onto itself. A professor in the audience whispered, "Wait, that's not standard." It wasn't. It was something Kahlil had devised himself, during late-night study sessions, long before Winterfield. By the 30-minute mark, sweat had beaded on his forehead. Not from heat, but focus. He was locked in now, no longer aware of the crowd, the camera, or the silence in the room. He wasn't even thinking in words anymore. Just symbols, shapes, relationships. This wasn't solving. This was translating a language no one else could speak. Then came the part he dreaded, the path where most doctoral students would have stopped. The component that required building a step from an unproven assumption, bridging it with logic, and risking collapse. He paused. The chalk hovered. Then he struck through the assumption, rejected it outright. The audience murmured again. Dr. Caldwell's expression changed, ever so slightly. Kahlil was doing something unexpected. With 15 minutes left, the board was almost full. His movements were quicker now, not frantic, but rhythmic, like music only he could hear. The logic held, the structure built, and for a moment it looked like he might actually finish. Until a voice broke the silence, not from the audience, not from the stage, but from the entrance to the auditorium. "I need to see that board." Heads turned. The dean stepped forward, alarmed. A woman in a dark blazer, with silver-rimmed glasses and an MIT ID clipped to her collar, walked briskly into the room. "I'm Professor Lena Chavez," she said, "visiting this week. And that student," she pointed at Kahlil, "is solving a problem that hasn't been completed correctly in 15 years. Gasps. Whispers. Phones raised. The dean looked flustered. "Dr. Chavez, this is a closed—" "Not anymore," she said firmly. "Let him finish. Then let me verify it." Caldwell's face paled slightly. Kahlil didn't look back. He just kept writing. As the timer hits 0002, Kahlil steps back, chalk lowered. He's done. But then Dr. Chavez rushes to the board, eyes wide, and mutters, "This changes everything." The crowd didn't know what to make of her at first. Dr. Lena Chavez didn't look like someone who shook academic institutions. She was compact, mid-40s, with a calm, calculating demeanor, the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but never let go of it once captured. But when she entered that auditorium, cutting through a sea of students like a knife through water, the atmosphere shifted instantly. She wasn't just visiting. She was watching. And not just casually. She was auditing the moment, analyzing it with the eyes of someone who had seen brilliance, dismissed bravado, and spent her life hunting minds that defied limits. The dean tried to intervene, but Chavez wasn't listening. She moved to the front row, ignoring the open stares, the flurry of whispers, and sat down, one leg crossed over the other, arms folded. Her eyes locked on Kahlil. She had heard of him before, in fragments. A colleague from an education conference had mentioned a black kid from Chicago doing post-grad level math at 17. Someone else referenced a Reddit thread about a quiet prodigy who made a racist professor choke on his own formula. At first, Chavez dismissed it as internet inflation, the kind of myth-making that bloomed in the age of viral moments. But then, the video hit her inbox, and she watched. Not just once. Several times. She watched his stance. His corrections. His refusal to flinch under surveillance. She saw something rare, a cognitive confidence that wasn't trained, but born. The kind of intelligence that doesn't seek approval, but reveals truth like light through glass. So when she discovered he was at Winterfield, and about to face a public academic gauntlet, she booked a train from Cambridge that same night. Now, she was here, and he was already writing. Kahlil didn't notice her at first. He was inside the problem, submerged in a language few could follow. His hand moved like a conductor, guiding a silent orchestra. His breath was steady, but his brow furrowed. He hadn't blinked in over a minute. Chavez leaned forward. Her eyes narrowed. She knew the problem on the board. It was one she had used in a doctoral qualifying exam, 5 years ago. Only 2 students had come close to finishing it, and neither had reached the conclusion without guidance. She studied his work. He wasn't just solving it. He was reinventing the path. Caldwell, standing off to the side, tried to maintain his composure. But he saw her, and he knew who she was. MIT's mathematics department was a different league, a place where minds like his used to dream of getting published. Her presence wasn't accidental, and it wasn't welcome. He took a breath, adjusted his tie, and whispered something to the dean. But the dean just shook her head. "This isn't ours anymore," she murmured. At the 20-minute mark, Kahlil began building the architecture of the final proof. Chavez's eyes lit up. He was using a layered method, not just solving forward, but backwards. He had reverse-engineered the tail end of the equation first, then built toward the beginning, like someone reading the ending of a book before decoding how it started. It was dangerous, risky, brilliant. Then, something changed. He paused. The chalk hovered midair. He stared at the board. Everyone watched, breath held. Cameras up. Then, he began erasing. Not a correction. Not a line. Everything. The gasps rippled through the room like a stone dropped in still water. Dr. Chavez stood up. "Wait," someone whispered behind her. "What is he doing?" Caldwell straightened, confused and for the first time hopeful. But Kahlil wasn't panicking. His face wasn't broken by fear. It was lit by realization. He had seen something. A flaw. Or worse, an opportunity. He erased the entire first half of the board, everything he'd built for the past 30 minutes, and started again. But this time, faster, sharper, cleaner. Dr. Chavez sat down slowly, stunned. This wasn't just someone solving for the right answer. This was someone challenging the premise of the question itself, the scaffolding of how the problem had been constructed. He wasn't rejecting math. He was rejecting the math they'd used to measure him. Every piece he rewrote was slightly different. Tighter transformations, alternate function mappings, abstract variable substitutions that even she had never used in public lectures. The crowd didn't understand, but they felt it, that something important was happening, that a line was being crossed, and once it was, there was no return. Caldwell's face had drained of color. He wasn't just watching Kahlil now. He was watching his own irrelevance take form. Every second Kahlil spent at that board was a second that proved Caldwell's assumptions, career and pride, were built on scaffolds too shallow to hold. He turned toward the dean. "We need to pause." "No," she said flatly. "He's deviating from." "No," she said again. "Then I want it reviewed." Dr. Chavez stood up again. "I'm reviewing it. And if he finishes this, you are going to have a very difficult conversation with your accreditation board." Caldwell turned to her, stunned. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying," Chavez replied. "I'm witnessing." Kahlil's hand moved like lightning now. With 10 minutes left, he had rebuilt the full architecture of the proof, but now it extended further than the original problem. He had introduced new variables to solve not only for the answer, but for the conditions under which the problem could be universalized to broader applications. He wasn't solving the equation. He was rewriting its legacy. In the crowd, a hush fell again. The tension wasn't theatrical now. It was reverent. A professor whispered, "We're not watching a test, we're watching a thesis defense." A student muttered, "That's not undergrad work. That's historical." Kahlil didn't hear any of it. He was somewhere else now. Somewhere no racism could reach. Somewhere his father's arrest didn't echo. Somewhere his third-grade label, disruptive, had no meaning. Somewhere sacred. At the exact 5-minute mark, he sets down the chalk again, and then without a word erases everything for a second time. The audience gasps louder. Dr. Chavez stands up abruptly. "Kahlil," she says, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" And he turns, eyes sharp, calm, solving it how it was meant to be solved. The auditorium had gone quiet long before Kahlil put the chalk down. The silence wasn't hesitation, it was reverence. He didn't just solve the problem, he dissected it, rebuilt it, and dared to do it twice in front of a room that didn't think he should have been in it to begin with. When he stepped away from the board, the only sound was the ticking of the timer hitting 0. Then, applause, not wild or theatrical, just honest. Reluctant for some, overwhelming for others. But while the students murmured and the video spread like wildfire across the internet, the institution was already working on something else. The cover-up. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Kahlil heard the knock. 3 people stood at his door, members of the Office of Academic Integrity. They wore polite smiles and held clipboards like shields. "We'd like to conduct a routine follow-up review," one of them said. He stepped aside without speaking. They combed through his things, like TSA agents at a border checkpoint. His laptop was copied, his notebooks photographed. Even the whiteboard in his dorm, filled with sketches and notes from weeks ago, was scanned with a tablet. "We've had an influx of concern from faculty," one of them added. "Not formal complaints yet, but given the attention, we want to be thorough." They didn't find anything, but they weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for doubt. By that afternoon, the backlash had started online. Winterfield University hadn't released a statement about Kahlil's success, no acknowledgement of his performance, no public apology from Caldwell. Instead, they posted a carefully worded message. Winterfield University takes academic integrity very seriously. A preliminary review is underway following concerns about procedural compliance during a recent academic event. That was all it took. Twitter threads turned skeptical. Reddit speculated wildly. He cheated. No way he did that live. MIT probably fed him the problem in advance. Suddenly the narrative wasn't about a young black genius defying the odds. It was about whether he should have been allowed to stand at the board in the first place. When Kahlil entered the dining hall later that evening, conversation stopped. Students didn't meet his gaze. Some who had once asked for help on assignments now clutched their phones tighter when he walked past. He overheard fragments, something about an investigation. "Honestly, if it were me, I'd just drop out. I mean, nobody solves that kind of thing from memory." He sat down at a table by the window. No one joined him. He pulled out his notebook, pretended to review notes, and swallowed the bitter lump forming in his throat. Later that night, his roommate Eli came in from a group study session. Kahlil glanced up. "You hear anything?" Eli hesitated. "They're saying you might get expelled." Khalil's expression didn't change. "For what?" Eli shifted. "Look, man. I don't know. I just think it's messed up. But honestly, you've got people nervous. No one's seen anything like what you did. They think there's no way you could have pulled that off without something up your sleeve." "You think I cheated?" Eli didn't answer. Just said, "I just don't want to get caught in the middle of whatever this is." The next day, Eli requested a new room. Winterfield's silence wasn't just calculated. It was coordinated. Khalil's scholarship portal showed a sudden status change. Under review. His access to the university's math server was revoked for maintenance. He received no notification. It was a slow, quiet exile, one that required no public statement, no hearing, no proof, just friction, enough to make him slip. Dr. Chavez tried to help. She published a long open letter on her professional blog. Kahlil Matthews didn't cheat. He saw a path the rest of us were too blind, biased or institutionalized to imagine. To question his performance is to question the foundation of intellectual freedom. It gained traction, then disappeared. The university's IT filters flagged her blog as unsecured content. Students could no longer access it from campus Wi-Fi. Dr. Chavez was quietly removed from her guest lecture rotation. The final blow came in a plain envelope. Slid under his door. A document. No signature, no header. Just one line. "You are being watched." He almost laughed. Almost. But then 2 days later, as he passed the admissions office, a janitor who'd always smiled at him pressed a folded page into his hand. "Didn't see nothing. Didn't say nothing," the man muttered before disappearing. Kahlil opened it. At the top, "Confidential, internal use only." Title: Academic Risk File. K. Matthews. He froze. He scanned the first line. Subject demonstrates exceptional raw cognitive capacity. Exhibits behavioral nonconformity and elevated social withdrawal. Risk classification: moderate high. It continued. Background includes unstable socio-economic conditions and exposure to adverse community factors. Displays patterns of intellectual defiance and independence uncharacteristic of traditional academic culture. Likely to challenge authority figures. Recommendation: monitor closely for policy deviation. His throat tightened. His fingers shook. He flipped to the last line, underlined in red ink. Recommend suppression of external academic opportunities until full behavioral vetting is completed. Kahlil stared at it for a long time. This wasn't just sabotage. It was a system, quiet, sharp, institutional, designed to keep him contained. They didn't want him removed. They wanted him neutralized. The next day, he receives an email with the subject line, "Urgent, offer withdrawn by Harvard Fellowship Committee." But at the bottom of the thread, a single forwarded message catches his eye. "Flagged per Winterfield risk notice. Proceed accordingly." Kahlil stared at the email on his laptop screen. Jaw clenched. The words were sharp. Clinical. Fellowship rescinded following new context provided by Winterfield's internal assessment. We appreciate your interest and encourage you to apply again in the future. At the bottom, barely noticeable, was a forwarded message. Flagged per Winterfield risk notice. Proceed accordingly. That single sentence shattered something in him. It wasn't just a lost opportunity. It was a signal. A silent transmission to the gatekeepers of prestige. Don't open the door for him. The worst part wasn't the rejection. It was the realization that it had nothing to do with merit. He hadn't failed. He'd been filtered. That night, he couldn't sleep. The ceiling above his dorm bed felt lower than usual. The air too still. The sounds outside, the distant hum of cars, the occasional burst of laughter felt fake, like noise meant to distract him from a truth now etched in stone. They never intended to let him rise. The backlash hadn't come from his failure. It came from his excellence. Because nothing threatens a rigged system more than a black boy who masters it. He sat at his desk, pulled out his notebook, and turned to a blank page. But instead of solving, he began mapping. Lines, arrows, names, incidents. He traced every point of resistance since the day he'd arrived at Winterfield. The flagged assignments, the random scrutiny, the hollow praise, the risk file, the vanishing opportunity. It wasn't disorganization, it was design. 2 days later, something strange happened. He visited the campus career office, not to ask for help, but to observe. From the moment he stepped inside, The room shifted. The receptionist stiffened. A counselor who had once promised to personally walk your resume into Goldman Sachs suddenly avoided eye contact. When Kahlil asked to view his internship application history, the staffer Mr. Grayson gave him a tight smile. Unfortunately, that data is restricted under FERPA policies. Kahlil narrowed his eyes. I thought I had access to my own file. Grayson's voice tightened. You have access to your profile, not administrative notes or interdepartmental evaluations. Kahlil stepped closer. So what's in there that I'm not supposed to see? Grayson didn't answer, just smiled. That smile, the kind that hides something sharpened, lit something inside Kahlil. They weren't just hiding files. They were hiding an entire track. The next day, he went to Dr. Chavez. Not for comfort, but for verification. She didn't hesitate. There's a rumor, she said, lowering her voice. Unconfirmed, but persistent. Kahlil leaned forward. Winterfield runs something called the filtered track. It's an internal tag applied to student records, mostly for non-aligned students. Code for black and brown students who don't fit their image. Those students still get access to classes, but their names are silently omitted from internal recommendation lists for fellowships, internships, and alumni sponsorships. Kahlil felt his breath hitch. Is it legal? She exhaled. It's not written policy. It's algorithmic. A flag here, a checkbox there, designed to never appear as overt discrimination. Just coincidence. He sat back in his chair. So that's why top internships never emailed back. Why recruiters never saw his application. Why others with lower GPAs and no public acclaim kept advancing. The institution wasn't just ignoring him. It was censoring him. Later that night, he returned to the admin building under the cover of darkness. He knew someone on the janitorial crew who worked late shifts. Terrence, a former Army tech now quietly sweeping floors for tuition benefits. Terrence let him in. No questions asked. Just make it quick, kid, he whispered. They log access time. Kahlil found an empty office, one used by student affairs, and logged into a staff terminal. He searched filtered track. Access denied. He tried. Student risk classification. No result. He typed, internal notes, K. Matthews. Nothing. But then he tried a name he remembered from his recommendation paperwork. Grayson. M. Internship liaison. And that's when it opened. Dozens of internal memos, tagged with vague acronyms, some labeled OR flag, others Q-classed. One included a spreadsheet titled, Internal Compliance Funnel, Non-Eligible Candidates. His name was on page 3. Next to it, status high visibility, do not advance without clearance. Kahlil sat back, breath shallow.
They'd built an invisible cage around him. Let him taste proximity.
Applaud him publicly, but never move beyond the ceiling they'd preset. It wasn't just racism. It was strategy. It was engineered invisibility. He didn't leave a trace. He logged out, erased the history, thanked Terrence quietly. Back in his room, he couldn't sit still, couldn't sleep, couldn't even write. He paced the room like a caged animal. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every student who had been quietly erased, every genius silenced before their second act. They needed proof. But how? The answer came 3 days later, in the form of an encrypted email from a burner account. Subject, you're not imagining it. Message body, I used to work in the career placement office. What they did to you, what they do to all of us, it's real. And I have documentation. Attached a file named filtered track protocols.zip. Just as Kahlil opens the file, his screen freezes, then goes black. A pop-up appears. This device has been locked by administrative over. Contact system security immediately. The screen went black. Kahlil stared at it, frozen. His heart pounded against his ribs like it was trying to break free. The file filtered track protocols.zip had been halfway through extracting when the pop-up seized the screen. This device has been locked by administrative oversight. Contact system security immediately. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Then a second message blinked onto the screen. This incident has been logged. He slammed the lid of his laptop shut, breath shallow. The room suddenly felt claustrophobic, walls pressing in. He looked toward the door, half expecting someone to be there already. A knock, a security officer, an expulsion letter. But there was nothing, only silence. And the buzzing guilt that comes when you've finally seen something you were never meant to touch. The next day the video dropped. Not the bootleg from someone's shaky phone. The real footage, High resolution, uncut. Someone, most likely a faculty insider sympathetic to his cause, had uploaded the full, unedited recording of Kahlil's calculus challenge to YouTube and tagged it, 17-year-old black genius, rewrites calculus live at Ivy League school. Within 4 hours, it had 1.2 million views. By midnight, it was on the homepage of Reddit, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Educators around the globe were dissecting it frame by frame. MIT professors reposted it with stunned praise. Dr. Chavez published a full-length breakdown of his method, calling it the most graceful correction to a legacy proof I've ever seen. High school math teachers used it in class. A Stanford PhD candidate tweeted, "I've never seen a live derivation of that problem, let alone a double resolution approach. This kid isn't a student. He's a revolution." Suddenly, Kahlil wasn't just the controversial math prodigy from Winterfield. He was a symbol, and Winterfield hated it. They released a short, robotic statement. Winterfield University is proud of its diverse student body and the academic rigor displayed by all members. We are currently reviewing our academic integrity policies to ensure alignment with institutional standards.
No congratulations!
No acknowledgement of his achievement. Just another smoke signal of distrust. But the world outside the gates didn't buy it. Hashtags like Jane, Kahlil the Genius, and Math Without Bias trended for days. Students from other universities began sharing stories of similar suppression. A national conversation started. How many Kahlils have we buried beneath red tape? How many gifts have been filtered out before they could rise? Kahlil barely left his dorm for 72 hours. Not because he was afraid, but because the noise was overwhelming. Reporters camped outside his building. Emails flooded his inbox. Everyone wanted a piece of him. Talk shows, podcasts, book agents. He ignored them all. He wasn't here for fame. He just wanted the truth seen, the system exposed. But every time he felt the fire of vindication flare in his chest, it was smothered by the shadow of that administrative override. That message hadn't just locked his computer. It had warned him. We're watching. On the third day, he received a formal letter slid under his door in a cream-colored envelope, embossed with the university's seal. Subject: Scholarship Status Notification. This is to inform you that your Merit Plus scholarship has been placed under administrative review pending an investigation into your conduct, course compliance, and use of institutional technology. His breath caught in his throat. It was happening. He hadn't cheated. He hadn't broken a single academic rule. But now they were claiming he might have broken a technical one. Accessing restricted data. Attempting to download protected materials. Violating terms of use. They couldn't disprove his brilliance. So they were trying to punish his curiosity. He stormed into Dr. Chavez's office, the envelope still clutched in his hand. "They're taking my scholarship." Her eyes flashed with fury. "On what grounds?" "Some nonsense about conduct violations. Because I opened a file." She grabbed the letter, scanned it. "This is garbage. They're reaching. They locked my laptop. Logged the incident. They're going to say I violated IT policy and use it to cut my funding." Chavez stood. "We're not letting that happen. They've already started." She looked at him, eyes sharp. "Then we go public. Again." That afternoon, Chavez called a press conference. Students packed the courtyard. Journalists returned to campus. This time, Chavez stood at the podium, not just as a visiting professor, but as a whistleblower. "This young man," she said, voice unwavering, "has done nothing but excel. And for that, he is being punished. Not for dishonesty, not for plagiarism, but for defying a narrative that was never built to include him." Behind her, Kahlil stood silently, arms folded, face calm. A reporter shouted, "Is it true his scholarship is under review?" Chavez didn't blink. "Yes, and it's an act of academic retaliation." Gasps, murmurs, cameras flashing. The pressure was building. But Winterfield wasn't budging. Not yet. Later that night, Kahlil sat alone in the library basement, his safe place. He stared at the dim green lights on the server closet down the hall, humming quietly. That night, it felt different. It didn't hum like it used to. It pulsed, monitored. He opened his notebook and wrote one line. "They can bury the math, but they can't erase the memory." He called his mother. "Ma, they're coming for the scholarship." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "They know you're too big now. Too bright. That kind of light makes people scared. I didn't do anything wrong. You did something right, baby." And in their world, that's worse. The following morning, He received a call from a number he didn't recognize. A deep voice greeted him. Kahlil Matthews? Who is this? My name's Ernest Brewster. I'm head of private fellowships at the Newton Institute for Mathematical Research. We saw your video. Kahlil didn't respond. We want to offer you a full fellowship, no strings, no background check, no risk file. We've already emailed your acceptance. He blinked. But I didn't even apply. The voice smiled. Didn't need to. Some things apply themselves. As he hung up, his phone buzzed again. This time it was from Winterfield. Subject, final notice. Pending termination of scholarship. No greeting. No context. Just a cold, digital threat. Just as he begins composing a response, a knock echoes at the door. He opens it and finds a legal courier holding a thick envelope marked Cease and Desist Unauthorized Access and Defamation Claim from Winterfield University Legal Counsel. The envelope sat on his desk like a loaded gun, thick, official, embossed with the Winterfield University seal. Below it, in red, a stamp, Legal Counsel, Private and Time Sensitive. Kahlil didn't open it right away. He stood in his room, heart thudding like a drum in a war parade. The lights were off. Only his desk lamp burned, casting shadows across the walls. He knew what was inside, or at least he thought he did. Retaliation always came wearing a suit and tie in places like Winterfield. He slowly opened the envelope, hands trembling, and unfolded the letter. Mr. Matthews, you are hereby instructed to cease and desist from making public statements or participating in interviews that portray Winterfield University or its faculty in a defamatory light. Furthermore, unauthorized access to administrative systems is under internal review and may constitute a violation of university policy. Kahlil stopped reading. There it was. They weren't just reviewing his scholarship anymore. They were setting him up for legal action. A new strategy. Make him a liability. Make him dangerous. The media was already playing along. In the days following the viral video, a slow shift in narrative began appearing in headlines. What started as celebration, Black teen genius solves historic math problem live, quickly morphed into suspicion. Too smart, too fast? Winterfield prodigy faces scrutiny over miracle math performance. Rogue student or savant? The troubling case of Kahlil Matthews. A talking head on a conservative morning show said, "You have to wonder, where does a kid like that really learn to do this kind of work? I mean, who trained him?" Another analyst, a former Ivy League admissions officer, chimed in. It's not uncommon for highly coached applicants to exhibit hyper-performance early on. But it doesn't always hold under pressure. The implication was clear. He wasn't brilliant. He was manipulated, manufactured, suspicious. And then, the threats started. Not to him. To his mother. Vanessa received the first one in her mailbox. A folded, handwritten note, tucked inside her apartment door. If your son hates America so much, maybe he should study somewhere else. Then another. No return address. One day, people will stop protecting kids like him. And what happens then won't be algebra. Vanessa called him that night, voice shaking. "I can handle it," she said, though he could hear the fear behind her words. "No, you shouldn't have to. I told you what this system does. I just didn't think they'd come for me too." Kahlil couldn't sleep that night. Because even as he fought to stay afloat, the system had reached for his family. At Winterfield, things got worse. His professors stopped calling on him in class. Students who once asked for his help now avoided eye contact. Campus security began casually trailing him. No words, just presence. One morning, he found his locker had been emptied. When he asked the admin office, they said, "Must have been reassigned by mistake." But it wasn't a mistake. It was a message. "You don't belong here." And yet, the world outside kept watching. His inbox overflowed. A documentary crew requested an interview. A civil rights organization offered legal aid. A major podcast asked for an exclusive. Kahlil ignored them all. He didn't want to become content. He didn't want to be reduced to a symbol. He just wanted to do the work. But now the work had become survival. Dr. Chavez tried to protect him. She fought publicly, writing op-eds, speaking at events, calling out the university's tactical silencing of brilliance. But even she had limits. One afternoon, she was summoned by the dean. When she returned to her office, her face was tight. "They're pressuring me to step back." Kahlil looked up. "They threatened you?" "Not directly, but the message was clear. They say I'm disrupting campus neutrality." "Neutrality?" he scoffed. "That's what they call it now? They want this to fade. They want the narrative to shift, to make you the problem. He clenched his fists. They already have. And then came the protest. Hundreds of students, many from outside Winterfield, marched on the main quad. Signs read, "Math is not a crime. Genius isn't a threat. Let Kahlil speak." But the university sent out an emergency bulletin. Unpermitted demonstrations may result in disciplinary action. Police were called in. Drone footage caught students being dispersed. A viral clip showed a professor telling the crowd to return to their studies and leave politics out of the classroom. It backfired. More coverage, more outrage, and more pressure on Kahlil. By the end of the week, he was mentally exhausted. His safe spaces had vanished. His work was no longer academic. It was emotional labor, political resistance, personal preservation. One afternoon, he found himself standing outside the admissions hall, staring up at the building like it was a fortress. He walked in, found the woman who had once processed his scholarship. "Am I under review because I broke rules?" he asked. She hesitated. "No, you're under review because you broke expectations." That night back in his dorm, he sat at his desk and looked through a small folder of saved letters, acceptance emails, thank you notes from tutors, a scholarship award notification from 2 years ago. He flipped to the last one, a copy of a recommendation letter from his high school math teacher. It read, "Kahlil is not just ahead of the curve. He's redefining the axis." He read it again and again, trying to believe it, trying to feel like that kid still existed beneath the noise. A knock interrupted his thoughts. He stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. No one was there, just a single envelope on the floor. No return address. But this one was different. It was marked with a deep crimson seal. Across the front, one word, Harvard. He opens it and sees only one sentence. "We'd like to offer you a full ride under one condition. Withdraw from Winterfield, immediately." By the time the envelope from Harvard hit his desk, Kahlil Matthews wasn't just a student anymore. He was a movement. And like most movements, he didn't ask for it. But the people had chosen him. On Twitter, video clips of his now legendary board performance were soundtracked with epic orchestral scores. Subtitles read, "They tried to silence him. He solved it twice. This is why representation matters. Smart isn't dangerous. Ignorance is." On TikTok, creators reenacted Caldwell's stunned expression mid-proof, captioned, "POV, you told the quiet black kid he was wrong." Even on platforms like LinkedIn, known for dry professionalism, educators called Kahlil a once-in-a-generation mind being caged by bureaucracy. His face was everywhere. He wasn't just trending, he was an idea. But the power of an idea isn't in how it begins. It's in how others pick it up. Students across the country started sharing stories under the hashtag #NotJustKahlil. "My professor told me not to bother applying to PhDs. They already had one diversity candidate. Got accused of plagiarism on a poem. About my mother. They told me I asked too many questions. Then wrote in my file that I was uncooperative." One voice became 10. Then 1,000. Then the nation. A civil rights education fund launched a petition, "Justice for Kahlil, Equity for All." It exploded. Within 48 hours, it had 2.3 million signatures. People weren't just angry, they were mobilizing. The petition demanded an independent investigation into systemic bias at Winterfield, the reinstatement of Kahlil's scholarship, the public release of university risk assessments on minority students. By the third day, even alumni began returning plaques, awards, and honorary degrees. One return certificate had "Not in my name" written across it in red marker. Then came the testimonials. Former Winterfield students started speaking up. It began with a single tweet. "I reclaimed academic. In 2012, I took Caldwell's class. I wrote a paper on black mathematical thinkers. He called it philosophical fluff and gave me a C." Another followed, and another. Within days, 18 former students had come forward. They described rejected assignments based on subjectivity, verbal microaggressions, inexplicable grading discrepancies, thinly veiled racism. One story hit hardest. "He told me some minds just aren't trained for rigor. Cultural upbringing matters more than people admit. That was the day I dropped my major." The pattern was clear. Dr. Caldwell hadn't just underestimated Kahlil. He had systematically suppressed minds like his for over a decade. Winterfield tried to plug the holes. PR emails, quiet meetings, denials without details. But the algorithm didn't care about silence. News anchors began asking real questions. CNN aired a segment titled, "Is Math Still Whitewashed?" Podcasts dissected Winterfield's risk-based student flagging system. Even The New Yorker ran a piece called "The Boy Who Broke the Board." On-campus revolution was brewing. A student coalition formed, Winterfield for Equity. They organized a massive walkout. At 10 a.m. sharp, over 5,000 students left class. They gathered outside the administrative hall, silent at first, holding signs. Not just one color. Brilliance shouldn't be a burden. You don't need a degree to see the truth. Then the chants began. Say his name! Fix the file. We see you, Kahlil. Local media arrived. Drones hovered. Helicopters circled. The footage went national. Winterfield had a crisis, and no amount of polished press statements could stop the pressure. Inside the university, faculty divided. Some backed Caldwell privately, calling the movement emotional noise. Others demanded change. One internal memo leaked. We cannot allow institutional preservation to override moral clarity. Caldwell must step down, and our admissions filters must be audited. Now, still the administration dragged its feet, until one final push broke the silence. At 11:43 p.m., a campus-wide email arrived. Subject: Emergency Town Hall. Mandatory attendance. The message read, "We acknowledge the concerns raised by our community and external observers regarding recent events. As part of our commitment to transparency, we invite you to an open forum. Mr. Kahlil Matthews has been asked to speak." That was it. No apology. No admission. But for the first time, they handed him the mic. Kahlil read the email in silence. He didn't smile. Didn't text anyone. Just stared. For a long time. Then he whispered to himself, "Now they want my words." He had spent years trying to be invisible.
Then months being watched.
Now, he'd be seen. That night, Dr. Chavez knocked gently on his dorm door. "You don't have to do it," she said. "I know.
You could walk away.
Transfer. Harvard is waiting." He looked at her. "I could," he said. "But they don't just want my silence. They want my surrender." She nodded slowly. "So you'll speak?" He stared out the window. They built an entire system hoping I'd never get to. The next evening, the auditorium was packed. Students, faculty, reporters, alumni, protesters, supporters, detractors. Even Caldwell was there, seated in the third row, arms crossed, face unreadable. A microphone stood at center stage.
The lights were hot.
The murmurs were loud. The air was electric. Then the dean approached the podium. She looked shaken. "Before we begin, one audience member has requested to make a statement regarding faculty conduct, including past recommendations and admissions." She turned and gestured. A woman in the front row, middle-aged, confident, eyes blazing. She took the mic and said, "Before Kahlil speaks, the community deserves to know the truth. Dr. Caldwell didn't just insult him. He wrote his original recommendation to block his admission. I know this because I wrote the second one, and I wasn't listed as the official source." Gasps rippled. Kahlil stood frozen. His file had been altered. The woman continued. The admissions board was split. His file had been quietly flagged. Someone removed my letter and replaced it with Caldwell's. He was never supposed to get in. And then she turned to Kahlil directly. "But you did. And now, they have to listen." The auditorium was packed to the rafters. Students lined the aisles. Faculty filled every corner, and the media's lenses glinted like stars beneath the stage lights. The room pulsed with silence, not anticipation, not fear, expectation. Everyone was waiting for the moment. And then, Kahlil stepped forward. Not timid, not cocky, measured, controlled, focused. This wasn't a defense. This was an autopsy. He stood beneath the spotlight, facing thousands, yet carried the weight of millions. He placed a simple brown folder on the podium, opened it, and looked up. "My name is Kahlil Matthews," he began. His voice rang clear, stripped of apology, "and I was never supposed to be here." A low murmur passed through the crowd, like air being sucked out of the room. Kahlil continued. "What happened to me didn't start with a single professor. It started long before that, when a high school counselor told me MIT was unrealistic. When I applied to this university and my application was flagged as non-traditional. When my skin became a variable in a math equation no one wanted me to solve." He lifted a sheet of paper from the folder and held it up. "This is my admissions profile, acquired legally, under FERPA. There's a line in here that says, displays strong aptitude, but may require institutional adjustment due to socioeconomic background. Gasps rippled through the audience. He placed that sheet down and lifted another. My original recommendation letter wasn't submitted by Dr. Emmett Caldwell. It was submitted by Dr. Lena Chavez. But her letter was removed, replaced by one that said I lacked adaptability and may resist academic structure. His gaze shifted across the crowd before landing, unflinchingly, on Caldwell himself. You tried to keep me out, and when that didn't work, you tried to make sure I wouldn't survive inside. Caldwell didn't move, not a twitch, just stared ahead. A mask of neutrality stretched too tight across his face. Kahlil turned back to the microphone. This institution labels students like me with invisible warnings. I was marked as an academic risk before I even attended orientation. He held up another document, K. Matthews, internal notes, lines highlighted in yellow. Likely to challenge authority. Displays non-traditional engagement. Recommends suppression of external academic opportunities. The crowd sat in stunned silence. Kahlil wasn't just telling a story. He was laying out the system, brick by brick. Winterfield's so-called filtered track isn't a myth. It's a reality. I have emails, internal memos, and time-stamped access logs to prove it. The screen behind him flickered to life. Projector light bathed the crowd in soft blue as Kahlil displayed the first email. From M. Grayson. Subject: internship shortlist. Remove Matthews from Goldman shortlist. Risk category unresolved. Another email appeared. From admin, internal. Do not advance Matthews for mentorship program. Let this cycle expire. The audience began shifting. Eyebrows lifted, mouths opened. A few students began to quietly cry. This isn't just about me, Kahlil said, eyes scanning the room. It's about a machine that smiles in brochures but edits names off opportunity lists. A machine that measures talent by proximity to whiteness and punishes anything outside its comfort zone. The applause that followed was soft at first. Then it grew, but Kahlil raised his hand. Don't clap yet. Silence returned like a command. He spoke slower now, his voice heavy but unwavering. For every one of me who made it here, 100 didn't. 1,000 got tired. Tens of thousands never even applied. This is what systemic gatekeeping looks like. Invisible barriers, smiling sabotage, and curated ceilings. Then he pointed to the front row, where the university's board members sat. I want an audit of every flagged file. I want a public report of how the filtered track works. I want resignations from every administrator who signed off on this pipeline of silence. And I want protections for the students still in it, still surviving in it today. The auditorium exploded into thunderous applause. Standing ovation. Journalists scrambled to capture every word. Students held up phones, recording history in real time. But in the middle of the storm, something subtle happened. From the corner of his eye, Kahlil noticed a quiet movement. The president of the university, seated dead center in the front row, rose from her chair. No applause. No words. She turned her back to the stage
and walked out.
No one stopped her. Gasps swept the room. Kahlil narrowed his eyes. Then he saw it taped to the back of her empty chair. A sealed envelope. Thick, white, marked with bold ink black letters. Resignation. Effective immediately. As the crowd erupted in confusion, a staffer rushed toward the envelope. But someone else stood first. Dr. Caldwell. He reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. And hesitated. Because written just below the seal, in small cursive script, was one chilling sentence. You were never in control. The moment the university president walked out of the town hall and left her resignation letter taped to her chair, Winterfield began to unravel. Within hours, confirmation circulated that her resignation was real, effective immediately. The administration scrambled to control the damage, but the tidal wave had already started. The first to fall next was Dr. Emmett Caldwell. Media outlets began circling his record like vultures. More former students spoke out. Archived teaching reviews surfaced. Low ratings paired with allegations of coded language, favoritism, and erased credit. When it was revealed that Caldwell had been a key voice in the filtered track's development, his fate was sealed. 3 days later, he resigned. His statement was careful and sterile. Due to recent media attention and student safety concerns, I have decided to step away from my teaching responsibilities indefinitely. No remorse. No accountability. But the lawsuits that followed spoke for him. Civil rights organizations filed class action suits against Winterfield. The charges ranged from racial discrimination to academic sabotage, all backed by documents unearthed by alumni, student whistleblowers, and investigative reporters. Internal memos were leaked, emails published, meeting recordings shared. The phrase filtered track became a national scandal. By the end of the week, the U.S. Department of Education announced a full federal investigation into the university's admissions and academic policies. And Kahlil, he became the face of it all. The offers began to flood in. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, each sent letters of invitation, not just with scholarships, but with tailor-made academic pathways, mentorship, housing, and research opportunities. One package included an endorsement deal with a major tech company. Another offered a paid publishing contract if he agreed to write a book about his story. It was everything he had dreamed of. But Kahlil couldn't decide if it felt like a victory or a bribe. Late one afternoon, Kahlil sat alone in the now infamous lecture hall. His phone buzzed softly beside him, emails with glowing subject lines. "Welcome to Yale. We're honored to extend you full admission. Your brilliance deserves this stage." He looked at the screen, and then turned it over. His stomach churned. How could he leave now? After what had been exposed, what had been lost, what had been fought for? How could he just walk away? But staying meant exhaustion. Constant scrutiny. No rest. He felt like he was being asked to choose between his peace and his purpose. Dr. Chavez found him that evening, still in the same spot. "You look like a man carrying a country on your back," she said, sitting beside him. Kahlil didn't look up. "I keep asking myself, would leaving mean I've won? Or that I've quit?" She sighed softly. "Sometimes leaving is survival." He finally looked at her. "And sometimes it's surrender." She gave a small nod. "Then maybe the better question is, what would staying cost you?" He leaned back. "My youth, my time, my silence." Then ask yourself, is the silence worth more than the sound of change? The next morning, Winterfield's interim board invited Kahlil to a closed meeting. They offered him something unprecedented: a permanent seat on a new student-led oversight committee, influence over reform policy, a vote in admissions procedure, budget transparency, real power. They didn't say it, but everyone knew. They were trying to keep him, to restore credibility. Kahlil listened, asked questions, took notes, but he didn't commit. He walked campus again that night, past the classrooms where professors once dismissed him, past the dorms that echoed with warnings slipped under doors, past statues and halls that had never carried his reflection. He didn't feel victorious. He felt haunted, until he reached the library steps and sat beneath the bronze statue of the university's founder. Etched beneath it, a line: "Wisdom without justice is a betrayal of learning." Kahlil stared at it for a long time, then whispered to himself, "So which one do I serve now?" He was still sitting there when his phone rang. No name, no caller ID. He almost didn't answer, but something made him swipe.
Hello?
The voice on the other end was formal, crisp. "Mr. Matthews, this is the Office of Public Engagement. The President would like a word." He blinked. "The President?" "Yes, sir. Of the United States." Kahlil stood up slowly, almost stumbling over his own shadow. "She's inviting you to speak at the National Education Summit next week. Your story matters. The country is listening." His voice caught. "Why me?" A pause. Then, "Because you weren't supposed to win. But you did, and now everyone has to ask why the system tried to stop you." As he held the phone to his ear, heart racing, the voice added, "This isn't just about you anymore, Kahlil. It's about who comes next. Are you ready to speak for them too?" The room looked the same. Rows of ascending seats. Matte black chairs. That same crooked clock still ticking above the whiteboard, just slightly off-center. The air smelled of dry erase markers, polished tile, and that unique scent old campus buildings always carried. Something between time and tension. But this time, everything was different. Because Kahlil Matthews wasn't sitting in the second row anymore. He was standing at the front, behind the very same lectern where months ago, a professor had tried to humiliate him in front of his peers. Now that lectern was his. And this time, the crowd wasn't staring at him in doubt or judgment. They were standing for him. It had been 7 months since the town hall that cracked Winterfield University wide open. 6 since Dr. Caldwell resigned under public pressure. 3 since Kahlil made his most controversial decision yet. He turned Harvard down. That alone made headlines around the world. He didn't take the offers from Yale, MIT, Princeton, or Stanford either. Instead, he chose to finish his semester, not as a student but as a guest lecturer, a scholar in residence, a symbol. Winterfield had begged him to return. After federal investigations, media firestorms, and millions in alumni backlash, the university was bleeding credibility. Kahlil's name, ironically, was the only thread keeping the institution relevant. He agreed, but only on one condition. He would teach a class, and it would be in room. The very room where his story began. The lecture hall was full. Every seat taken. The new interim dean sat quietly in the back, barely breathing. The student body had shifted too. This year's freshmen looked different. Braver, bolder, browner. The front row was lined with kids who looked just like Kahlil. Tight curls, skin like molasses and coffee. Eyes lit not with fear but focus. And this time, the ones taking notes weren't wondering if he belonged. They were wondering how far he'd go. Kahlil stepped forward, calm as a sunrise. He tapped the mic, but it was already hot. "Welcome," he said. "Let's begin." He turned to the whiteboard and uncapped a marker. With deliberate strokes, he wrote, "Mathematics is a language of patterns. So is power." He stepped back, letting the sentence breathe. Then faced the room. "Today," he said, "we're not solving equations." A pause. "We're unlearning assumptions." He began slowly, with a concept in topology. How the properties of space can shift under pressure without changing its nature. He translated it into real life. Used analogies from music, architecture, even basketball. He built the room's understanding piece by piece, like scaffolding. Every time he introduced a variable, he also unpacked a bias. Every time he solved a step, he also dismantled a system. It wasn't just a math lecture. It was a revolution disguised as a lesson plan. "Let's talk boundaries," Kahlil said, pulling up a complex function on the projector. He pointed to the asymptotes. "Now what's the hidden assumption here?" A hand rose in the second row. A girl with glasses, her notebook filled margin to margin.
That the function behaves the same at every boundary.
He smiled. "Exactly. And what happens when that assumption comes from bias?" The room was silent. Then she said quietly, "You exclude the unexpected." And sometimes, Kahlil added, "The unexpected is where the breakthrough lives." He walked across the front of the stage, marker still in hand. "This school once told me I was a risk, that I needed to adjust, that I didn't fit the rigor." He stopped. "But what they never understood is that I wasn't trying to fit it." Another pause. "I was trying to reshape it." At the end of the lecture, when most guest professors would assign reading or answer questions, Kahlil did something else. He turned back to the board and began to write a new equation, one the room didn't recognize. It was long, elegant, looping in notation that danced across the surface like calligraphy. He finished, stepped aside, and let it hang there. "This," he said, "isn't just a formula." The class leaned forward. "It's a new way of modeling boundary disruption in nonlinear systems. It challenges 3 core assumptions about predictability and variance." He let that land. "It's being peer-reviewed now. If accepted, it'll redefine how bounded systems are studied in higher mathematics." A few jaws dropped. Someone near the back whispered, "No way." Kahlil looked directly at the front row, the same row where Caldwell had once stood, chalk in hand, mocking his intelligence. "What if I told you," he said slowly, "the boy you doubted just rewrote a law of mathematics?" He let silence do the talking. A deep, proud silence. Then he stepped forward, leaned on the podium, and said, "And I didn't do it in spite of what this school tried to take from me." A pause. "I did it because of it." The room erupted, not in applause but in awe. It wasn't fanfare. It was reverence. These weren't just students witnessing a lecture. They were watching history repeat, but this time with justice, with reclamation. Outside that lecture hall, new banners hung across campus. Excellence without exception. Equity is rigor. You belong. Admissions policies were overhauled. The filtered track was dismantled. Professors were retrained. New ones hired. Transparency became law, not luxury. And in the library, a new wing was under construction. The Kahlil Matthews Center for Mathematical Justice. It would offer scholarships, research funding, and mentorship programs for underrepresented students in STEM. The boy who once slipped through the cracks had now built a bridge across them. As Kahlil packed his bag at the end of the lecture, a quiet voice approached. "You changed everything," a student said. He turned. It was a first year, nervous, bright-eyed, black, just like he'd been. Kahlil smiled. I didn't change everything, he said. I just showed them what happens when you finally stop shrinking. The student nodded, gripping his notebook, and then asked, So, what's next? Kahlil paused, looked back at the board, and whispered, Now we teach them how to listen. If you've ever been told you weren't enough because of where you're from, or the color of your skin, you know Kahlil's story isn't just his, it's ours. They tried to bury brilliance under bias. But truth has a way of rising. Type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this broke your heart.